Hi, welcome to our channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. If this is the first time you are seeing our channel, can I request you to do hit the subscribe button as well as the notification so that if we at FPA do any videos on finance, accounting, ACCA and everything ACCA, then you do come to know. Now, what are we doing today? So in our today's session, Zaheer, your ACCA mentor, will be running through what is financial reporting paper in terms of the overview and the syllabus, then the exam pattern, and lastly, how do you go about preparing for the exam. Now, in terms of the financial reporting overview and syllabus, I obviously need to make sure that you understand that financial reporting is the skill level paper, and there is a lot of base that is expected to be made for this paper from your knowledge level paper, financial accounting. So therefore, if you do not have knowledge of financial accounting, can I urge you to go through the syllabus and all the content that is available on the ACCA global platform or the study hub now. And you should be well versed with some of the basics that we look in the financial accounting, because it does ensure that you have a strong base for a slightly more technical paper, financial reporting. Now, what do we have in financial reporting? There are 22 chapters. Now, this, by the way, is your Kaplan textbook index. So we at FPA, we use Kaplan. So therefore, as you can see, there are 22 chapters. Now, in terms of the length of the subject, it is fairly long. 22 chapters is fairly long. However, the good news is that the paper does have a lot of numericals. Now, why do I say that this is a good news? Because remember, if I ask you 1 plus 1, it is always going to be a 2. So if you have understood how do you go about calculating the numbers as per the several standards that we'll be looking at, it should be fairly easy for you to do in the exams. You will find in our lectures that we do have a lot of exam tips to share, wherein you will be able to pick up a lot of easy marks given to you in the question paper itself. But we will come to it in a minute. However, right now, just very briefly, because look, today's is a demo, today's is an introductory lecture, and we will very quickly talk about what is there in the syllabus. So as you can see, 22 chapters. The first chapter talks about introduction to published accounts. A lot of it is coming from the financial accounting knowledge. However, we at FPA, we do not assume that you have all the knowledge of FA. So we here will ensure that even if that paper has been exempted to you, we will cover everything that is there in the syllabus, and if required, also make sure to give you background from the FA papers as well, right? So here in the first chapter, we typically talk about what are the various financial statements, what is the framework, what is a P&L, what is a balance sheet, and what are the names that we use, because it is no longer balance sheet, but it is statement of financial position. It is no longer just profit and loss. It is statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income, right? So there are a lot of things that are new if you are coming not from an IFRS background, but let's say Indian accounting standards. Okay. Then the next chapter is tangible non-current assets. Tangible, you can touch and feel. So this is to do with all the standards around property, plant and equipment largely, right? Because that becomes a huge chunk of your financial statement. So this is where we talk about that standard. Moving on to intangible standards. This is where, you've got goodwill, or you've got copyright, or you've got those kind of things. How do you treat them, right? Then there is impairment of assets. Now, of course, it is not necessarily that when you buy an asset or when you acquire, let's say, a license, it will work the way you've always wanted it to be. Let's say a new technology comes in and your software is now almost redundant, and you were supposed to use it for the next 5 years. You're only able to use it for the next, let's say, 2 years. That means the value that you're going to get out of that asset is no longer the same, right? So therefore, in such instances, you need to write off the value which comes under the guidance of impairment of assets, which is your IS 36. Then comes your non-current assets held for sale and discontinued operations. This is another new standard which talks about what do you do when you have an asset that you have set aside for a sale, or it could be in operations. Let's say, there is Reliance, and Reliance has, five businesses. Of that one business they want to shut off. How do you show that business on your financials until it is not sold off, right? So that's that. Then comes very important, and unfortunately a lot of students consider these chapters to be okay, it's all theory, we can forget about it. But remember, when we talk about ACCA, there is a huge impetus on the conceptual understanding, and you at FPA will find that all the mentors here will ask you to focus on concepts, because that's the only way to crack the exams. You cannot do rote learn. You cannot just do 10 questions and you'll be fine. You need to understand the concepts, because the questions in the exam are going to be very different to what you see in the textbook and the exam kit, right? So therefore, theory is important. So these chapters around conceptual framework, what is an asset, what is a liability, what is an equity, what is a debt, these are the kind of things that you need to know why they are asset, liability, etc. So that tomorrow, if there is something new completely, like when crypto came out, no one really knew how do you treat a cryptocurrency, right? So therefore, those are the kind of things that you learn in this chapter. Similarly, measurements, what are the various ways you can measure assets, right? Is it cost? Is it replacement value? Is it historical cost? Then moving on to other standards. Other standards is a combination of multiple standards that are there. You have IS 8, you've got IS 10, you've got IS 2. So there are multiple standards, that come in this chapter, right? Then there is a very interesting chapter 9, which is financial assets and financial liabilities. So while we know what is plant and machinery, what is land and building, but how do you go about investments in shares? Or how do you go about shares that you've purchased for your children for the next 15, 20 years? Similarly, if you have taken a loan, if it's a debenture, if it's a loan, how do you record it? Right. So this chapter, while it is a very long chapter, it's a very interesting chapter, right? Then comes foreign currency. How do you deal with transactions which are in foreign currency? Then comes revenue. Again, revenue, while you may think, revenue should be fairly easy, but there is a long, there are 5 steps on how do you go about recognizing the revenue. When can you recognize the revenue? How much revenue can you recognize? I'll give you a small example. You should get a flavor of what we do in the class. So let's say, for example, you enroll in a gym on the 1st of Jan for the next 12 months. Now, do you think if you paid 12,000 rupees to this gym person for the next 12 months, that means every month that is 1,000 rupees that you are paying for? Now, should that gym owner recognize the whole 12,000 as a revenue, or should they recognize only 1,000 as 1 month's revenue? And if they're not recognizing all the revenue, what do you do with the remaining 11 months? Right. So those are the sort of things that we learn in this chapter, IFRS 15 revenue. Right. Then comes leases. Again, very interesting. By the way, leases used to be an old standard which got replaced by a newer standard, IFRS 16. Right. So how do you go about recording any leases that you do? So, for example, not many organizations will outright buy an asset. And anyone who comes from FM paper, you will see that the companies have an option, either buy or either you lease, right? So when you're taking on a rent, how do you recognize that rental? Because a lot of times these leases, while they may seem as a rental, but it is actually a loan. So this standard is all about that. Then comes taxation. What do you do with taxes, especially deferred taxes? Because it is not necessary the accounting value of an asset and the taxable value of an asset, they are the same. Because look, you may want to depreciate the car that you bought at 10% a year, but the UK tax rule says that you need to write them off at 18%. So how do you go about doing that? So there will always be this difference between the two values. So what do you do because there will be differences in the tax amounts as well. So this standard will tell you how to go about it. Then comes earnings per share. How do you calculate the earnings per share? Then IS 37, IS 10. Sorry, I mentioned IS 10 another standard, but actually IS 10 is here. Now, IS 37 is provisions. How do you record provision? Can you just record provision for anything and everything? Because look, if you've had a very, very good business year, you may want to reduce your profits because you're not sure if you will be able to make the same profits in the next year. So a lot of companies, what they try to do, they book provisions so that they can reduce the profits this year, and then they reverse the provisions in the next year. So the profit moves from current year to the next year. There is a term that is used for this called profit smoothing, right? We'll talk about these things. We'll talk about case studies as well when we do this in the class, right? So that's IS 37. There's IS 10, which is subsequent events. What do you do if something happens after 31st of March, if that is your balance sheet end day, right? So what do you do if there is something that happens? Let's say a debtor who now is not going to be able to pay you and has gone bankrupt. Do you go back in your financial position and do you change the value of the debtor, or do you just leave it? There is a fire. What do you do if the fire on the 2nd of April burns all of your inventory? Do you do anything about it? So that's what your IS 10 tells you, right? So in the other standards, now I recollect, it was inventory that we look at. There's another standard which I'm now trying to recollect. I do know that it is not one of my favorites, right? It is to do with farming. I can't recollect that name, but nevertheless, right? Those are some random standards that will come in the chapter 8. Coming to chapter 16, which is statement of cash flows. Now, cash flows, I'm sure you will start to read these concepts as well. Like in FM, you will see that cash is the blood of the business. So while profitability is very good, but if the business is not able to make, let's say, cash, right, they will not be able to sustain for very long. So we discuss, case studies like, let's say, Zomato and Swiggy and Paytm. Now, while these companies have been making losses, or they were making losses year after year, but they were able to still survive because there were investors with deep pockets and they were able to give them the cash to manage the operations. So now the investors don't just look at the profitability, they want to know if you are going to make any cash which will help them sustain the business for a long term, right? So that's your cash flows. Then we start. So by the way, all this while we are looking at individual standards, we are looking at all individual standards and how do you treat transactions within these standards. But then comes your full-fledged financial position, wherein here in the chapter 17 we start to talk about consolidated, because while all of these standards that you look at, we are looking at as a stand-alone financial position or a P&L, right? So how does an asset IS 16, or how does IFRS 9 financial instruments or revenues, etc., in a stand-alone financial position look, or a P&L look? However, it is very much possible that not only just the parent, but they will have subsidiaries that they need to be consolidated in their books. Because look, if there is Reliance, right, Reliance also will have a Geo. Reliance will also have 10 other businesses that they want to show to the investors that, look, because of your money, because of the profits we made, we've now been able to, have all of these businesses as well. So they all need to be consolidated, right? They all need to be showed at a group level. So this is where you start to understand that what do you do when you have to consolidate? How do you consolidate financial position? How do you consolidate P&L? What if there are associates? Now, associates are ones where you do not have the control over, wherein your stake is less than 40%, right? So, but you still have a 40% stake. That is a big enough stake. So how do you show them in your P&L? How do you show them in the balance sheet? So that's your chapter 20. And then comes group disposals, is when you are selling your subsidiaries. What do you do then? Do you show them So the whole year, half year, what values, etc., etc. And then comes last, but probably the most important, which is interpretation of financial statements. Believe you me, now ratios is something that people who are studying in college, they have been doing it. If you've been doing ACCA, almost every paper somewhere or the other has ratios, including audit. You'll be surprised, even audit has ratios, right? So we think that we understand ratios really well. Unfortunately, no, because when you look at the requirement for FR, it is very different to what, let's say, at a PM it is expected of you, at audit it is expected of you, and you will see in SBR and SBL and whatnot. So it is very important that we understand what is the examiner's requirement when they are asking you for interpretation. So you just don't get away by saying this is going up and this is going down. You have to find out why it is going up and why it is going down, right? Those kind of things. So that's again a very important chapter, the last chapter. Now moving on to the exam pattern, because look, at the end of the day, and this is something that I always talk to my students. I, in fact, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, right? So if you do want to stay updated with a lot of things that I write about, do follow me on LinkedIn. You can search with my name, Zaheer, ACCA. So coming back, I always mention that start with the end in the mind, that this is what I have to be eventually doing. So you need to understand what is going to come in your exam. So in your exam, the pattern is you've got 100 marks paper. It's a 3-hour exam. There is section A, B, C. In section A, you have 15 questions, 2 marks each, right? So it will be questions from anywhere. It will be questions which will be subjective, objective. So you can have a calculation and you can have a theory-based question as well. So there is no limit on only so many theory, only so many numericals. So you should be prepared that anything can be examined here, right? Similarly, section B. Now, section B slightly different from section A, because while it is still objective style question, but there is a case study. So there will be a paragraph given to you, and on that paragraph there will be 5 questions given to you. Of course, it will be not too many standards. So if there is a case study, there may be a standard or 2 standards, right, that will be examined. It could be, let's say, IFRS 15, right? How do you go about recognizing revenue? So there could be theory as well as numericals in there, but there will be 3 case studies, and there will be 10 marks in each case study, and there are 5 questions in each case study. So you can see 15 marks, 15 questions, 2 marks each, 30 marks in section A, and then you've got 3 case studies, 10 marks each, 30 marks again in section B. So that's your total 60 marks. Then comes your last section C, which has got 40 marks. Here you've got 2 questions, and both of them are 20 marks each. Now here it is a very much possibility that you can have a consolidation, you can have a standalone, you can have interpretation, but these are the most common scenarios or the questions that comes in the section C. Your interpretation questions typically comes in section C. So therefore, I usually ask my students to not take that chapter very lightly, because this is where you have to write. And if you don't understand the concepts, if you don't know what to write in the exam, you can very, very easily lose lots of easy marks there, right? So that's your exam pattern. Of course, I've done separate videos on, what is, how do you go about preparing for the exam, right? But this is a very, very brief, on how do you, or what are the things that we need to do when we are going to prepare for the exam. So you've got study text. Now, study text is what we do in the classroom, right? So whether you're offline, whether you're online, we will cover all the chapters that you see. Now, while we try and do these exams once every quarter, that means we have less than 3 months to finish the syllabus, right? But what we do is that we try and complete the study text at least in the classroom, let's say around 7, 8, 9 weeks, right? Now, how do we go about that? We do 4 hours, Saturday, Sunday, so it's 8 hours. So you can see around in 8 to 9 weeks, we are able to complete the syllabus. However, this is your base, guys. So when you are looking at these lectures, and I do hope that you do eventually, study with us, right? That the bits that we look in the textbook is super important, is because it gives you a base. Can you imagine a building one, two, three, four floors, but you do not have a ground floor, you do not have a base? It will not be a very strong structure, right? And that is exactly what study text does, is that it gives you a good base. You understand the concepts, right? So you always go through the study text first, right? Once we are done with the study text, then you move to the exam kit. Exam kit is all the questions that, and we use, by the way, Kaplan. So all the questions that comes from previous papers and similar to the exam style questions, you will find them in the exam kit. Then you do mocks. We do use Kaplan mocks for our students. We also have made several mocks of ourselves. You will be, I'll be honest, you will be slightly frustrated with the number of mocks that we get our students to do. Right, at knowledge level, the list is about 10 to 12 mocks. At skill level, we expect the students to do again 10 to 12 mocks. Right, so that's where our core strength is. We get the students to do a lot of practice, and touch wood, that's why our pass rates have been very good. So mocks, and then a lot of these mocks you will need to do on the CBE platform. So while there will be mocks on our own LMS that you do, but a lot of these you will need to do on the CBE platform as well. Now, anyone who does not know CBE platform, it is a computer-based exam platform. You can access it from your My ACCA. Very important. If you want to really crack the exam, you really need to make sure you understand the CBE platform, because if you do not know your playing field, if you do not know how to go about, where the question is, how do you move from section to section, where do you get the calculator from, or where the scrap work area is, or how do you jump from one section to another, right? How do you work in that little spreadsheet area? If you're not used to it in the exam, I assure you, you will find it very difficult, right? Irrespective of how many years of experience you have on Excel, that interface is different, guys, right? So if you are someone who's a working professional, I would still urge you that go to the CBE platform and practice, and don't do it on your regular Excel, right? And then comes your last and again equally important resource, Study Hub. The Study Hub, recently launched by ACCA, it has got all the content that you need to pass the exams. Now, why are we still sticking to Kaplan? Is because we feel that there are still some bits that are not there yet, or maybe the students can always do better with additional content. So we are sticking to Kaplan, right? However, Study Hub has got a lot of good resources. Let's say they've got quizzes, they've got flashcards, they've got summary notes, right? So we urge the students that when you are doing the exam preparation, you need to look at the Study Hub as well, right? So that is where I want to try and wrap up, is that when you are joining FPA, right, not only are you going to be looking at all of this content that we were just discussing, from the index, study text, we will also be revising, we will also be doing mocks and doubt solving, right? So there is a lot of comprehensive work that goes into making sure that you prepared for the exam, right? So on that note, I really hope that you've enjoyed the lecture, and you do eventually decide to join us for our lectures, whether it is offline, whether it is online. Just so you know, we are offline at multiple locations in Mumbai. We have offline centers in Pune, in Delhi, in Hyderabad, in Ahmedabad, right? And hopefully in several other places down the line. But if you do not want to travel all the way, we are online as well. Like you have this lecture, we will have pre-recorded lectures for you guys. And we also have live lectures as well for most of the papers throughout the year. So if you do want to know more, please do write to us or do contact us through our website or link given in the video. Thank you so much, and all the very best.